Hello folks. It turns out the basement is a great place to spend an election campaign. Forget the stump speeches, awkward photo ops with babies and throwing down beers at the pub to show that leaders are just regular guys. The basement is your gaffe-free zone while you hide away and let your foot soldiers out on the loose to do your work for you. Worked a treat for Joe Biden, who spent months of the 2020 US presidential campaign cooped up at home. And as we know, he ended up romping it in. Now it seems Anthony Albanese has taken a leaf from Biden's playbook, albeit unintentionally. He got COVID. It struck him off the campaign just as he was finding a little momentum. But in the end, it was a pretty good week to spend away from the cameras because all the heat was on the government and Albanese didn't have to do a thing. And what's even more remarkable is it came on the very two issues the government wants to base this whole election on: national security and the economy. Let's back it up for those who've just dropped by for a look. Remember week one? Claimed to be the worst start to an election ever after Anthony Albanese failed to recall the national unemployment rate.
Andrew.
What's the national unemployment rate?
National unemployment rate at the moment is, I think it's 5.4. Sorry, I'm not sure what it is.
Still a car crash, isn't it? But since then, I'd have to say Labor has stormed back and won the following 2 weeks. So, by my count, that puts Labor up 2-1 in the fight with 3 rounds remaining. I've spoken a few times now about the national security own goal kicked by the government. The very short version being that China has signed a security pact with the Solomon Islands, which means it can set up a military base in Honiara, less than 2,000 kilometres from Australia's east coast, despite protestations to the contrary. The second major blip for the government came last week when official inflation figures showed how much everyday prices have risen, 5.1% year on year. That is a steep jump. Debt is now the highest it's ever been. Up to a dozen interest rate hikes are expected over the next 12 to 18 months, which means it's all going to get even worse. I put this to the Prime Minister when I spoke to him about supposedly being the better economic manager. Your government claims credit, though, when the economy goes well, but when the bad stuff happens, it's an international trend and you have no power. Surely you can't have it both ways.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that assessment, Peter. I mean, there is a war in Europe. There are global inflationary pressures. It is true that Australia's inflation rate is lower than in Europe and the United States and even in countries like New Zealand. They're all just facts. They are the facts.
And he's right. War in Europe, lockdowns in China are not the fault of the Australian government. But wages have been flat for years, long before COVID emerged. And the extra money thrown at the problem, such as cutting fuel excise and handing out cash, will just get swallowed up by inflationary pressures. The government likes to point out that inflation here is not as steep as it is in the US, which is also true. But wages in the US are rising at a faster rate than Australia. So that actually puts us behind our American friends. Anyway, many voters will still have huge trust issues with how an Albanese government would handle the economy, and it's been short on how it will fund its suite of policies during this campaign. But right now, people may wonder if they should at least give Labor a shot, and they'll be more inclined to do that if Albanese remembers the important figures or just goes back to the basement. Here's the former Defence Minister Christopher Pyne on this.
Well, I don't know whether the Labor Party headquarters will be pleased or not whether Anthony's out of isolation. They've had a reasonably good week and Anthony has not been doing press conferences and they've been showcasing their team. So they've had a better week than the first 2 weeks. I mean, the interesting thing about this campaign, Pete, is that the Labor Party should have been popping champagne corks a month ago, and yet they've had a 2-week lacklustre campaign. The government is having a good campaign. A month ago, Labor should have been clear air to win the election, and the government is back in it.
Well, that's Christopher Pyne's view, and the polls suggest the momentum, though, is back with Labor. But as we know, that doesn't mean it will win. Shorten lost the unlosable election 3 years ago, and if it were to happen again, where does the party go from there? Well, that one's a doozy. Thanks for watching. Please support this channel by giving it a like, share and subscribe below. I'll see you next week.